Good evening. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I want to take a minute to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, these are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past, present, and future, and thank them for their stewardship of the land. Welcome to tonight's program with Paul Lynch and Paul Constant. Thanks to our partners at Elliott Bay Book Company, Seattle City of Literature, Dublin UNESCO City of Literature, and Grove Atlantic. We're grateful as well to our series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation and the Seattle Times for their generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Generous gifts from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in the community. So I think a few of you here are with the foundation and you're donors to the foundation. So let's give them and all of our sponsors a round of applause. I have just a couple announcements before we get started. Our friends from Elliott Bay Book Company are selling copies of Paul Lynch's book at the table to your right. And if you need to exit the auditorium during the event, you may have noticed that this door became a wall. As Paul Lynch said, it's very ominous. But if you do need to exit during the program, there's a door directly to your right there that says Children's Center on it. There's also a second exit past the stairs, under the stairs here. So don't panic, it'll all be fine. Oh, and finally, we have assistive listening technology here on the table here. So if you find that you need one during the program, if you just give me a little wave, I can bring you one of those. Oh, you're getting an echo? Okay, I'll let the folks know. Would you like one of the devices now? Want to give it a go, and then we'll see if we can work it out. All right, we'll have our sound folks work on the echo issue, and I'll just keep talking while they get that sorted out because they'll need me to keep talking in order to sort it out, and then you can help me understand. You can help me understand if you're still getting an echo. What are we going to talk about? Well, I'm going to keep talking about our speakers. Does that sound okay? Fantastic. Okay. Well, now I'm delighted to introduce tonight's speakers. Paul Lynch is the author of the novels Red Sky in the Morning, The Black Snow, Grace, and Beyond the Sea. Grace won the 2018 Carey Group Irish Novel of the Year and was shortlisted for the 2018 Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction and the William Saroyan International Prize for Writing. The Black Snow won France's Prix Libre Nou for Best Foreign Novel and was a finalist for the Prix de Meilleur Livre Étrange, which is the Best Foreign Book Prize. He lives in Dublin, and his novel Prophet Song won the Booker Prize for Fiction in 2023 and was just awarded the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for 2024. Paul Constant will be interviewing and talking with Paul Lynch, and Paul writes about books and bookstores for the Seattle Times, and his writing has appeared in many publications, including Business Insider, LitHub, and the Los Angeles Times. In addition to his work as a fellow for the public policy incubator Civic Ventures, he's the author of comic books, including Planet of the Nerds and Snelson, Comedy is Dying. They're here tonight to talk about Prophet Song, Lynch's Booker Prize-winning novel that presents a vision of Ireland careening toward authoritarianism and one woman's fight to keep her family together. So please help me welcome Paul Lynch and Paul Constant, and we'll keep working on the sound.
Hello, can you hear us? Well, I'm not the important one. Can you hear him?
Echo.
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 Echo. Thank you all for joining us tonight. You will have a chance to ask questions, so start thinking up some good ones. Hello, I loved the book. Thank you for writing it, and thank you for flying all the way out here just for us tonight.
Let's talk about the flying.
Yeah.
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 You know, I had to pull an all-nighter to get to Houston. which was wild. And then there was 6 hours jet lag. And then I went on stage the next night, and it was hallucinatory. There's no other way to put it. But I got through it. So
Mhm.
this is a bit better. Yeah.
And we've determined that this is what, the 278th interview you've done for this book?
Yeah.
It's up there.
Yeah.
So we'll try to. Huh. All right.
I don't think that's going to work.
So it seems like most writers who I interview fall into two categories. Either they've been writing since before they can remember, or they picked up writing in their third year of college and took to it like a duck to water. Are you either of those, or are you a secret third path?
I was the writer who refused to write. I was the writer who did everything else but write. And it's interesting because it's a journey. It's a journey of vocation where you learn that the thing that you have to do, you have to rule out everything else first. And so I often say to young people, they say, I want to be a novelist. I want to be a writer. And I say, okay, try not writing first. See how that works out for you. Because sometimes not writing, most of the time actually not writing works out really well for them, because not writing is actually what they're meant to be doing. But because writing is something you have to do. And what had happened for me was I did write. I actually thought I'd be a poet at some point in my teens, like probably 80% of most teens. And I did actually take it quite seriously, and I read very deeply. But I stopped writing poetry about 18 or 19, and I went into journalism, and I started working for the Sunday Tribune newspaper in Dublin, which it's now gone, but it was a serious intellectual sort of center-left broadsheet newspaper. And I kind of blagged my way in, and I went to work on the subs desk, writing, editing stories, writing headlines, but I got 1 day a week. And it became 2 days, and then I ended up working full time. And I realized, looking back, that kid just wanted to work with words. He just wanted to be in the cauldron where language is happening every day. And I hadn't figured anything out. That's the thing. I hadn't worked out that I really wanted to be a writer. And I think that I was probably suppressing it to a huge degree, because I was doing other stuff. I was playing in bands, and I was taking a lot of photography and ruling things out. And what happened was I was 30, and which is kind of late. It's not. Toni Morrison was 40 when she published her first book, and Penelope Fitzgerald was 61, I think.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Something like that. So it's not 40. 30 isn't crazy late to start writing, but it's late enough in the scheme of most people. And I was on holidays in Lipari in Sicily, and I was in a taxi going up a hill, just this winding hill, looking out over the sea, and I had an epiphany. It was literally the thunderbolt came down, and it was like a voice spoke, and it was, you're living a lie. You're meant to be a writer. You're meant to be a novelist. And it was like this internal reckoning. You have to swerve. You have to do this, because if you do not, you will die a bitter old man. So start now. And the thing is it's really interesting, because I hadn't written any fiction. So how did I know that I was meant to be a fiction writer? How did I know that? Because turns out that voice was completely right, okay? Because I'm here in front of you, having written 5 books. But this is the thing that fascinates me is, when Satan was thrown out of heaven, and as he fell through the abyss towards hell, what would have happened if he had swerved? Right? We don't know. The swerve is really important. We all should have the ability to swerve, and you don't know where it's going to take you. And sometimes when you get that impulse, when you actually listen to what's coming through from your own inner oracle, because that's what it is, then you have to swerve. You have to make the leap. And so I made the leap, and I started writing. I had been a film critic for a number of years before that. I was writing 2,000 words a week for the Tribune at that point. But I started writing fiction very seriously. I wrote some short stories that were never published and that I kept. That they're in the drawer and there they shall remain. But I started writing Red Sky in the Morning 6 months later, and I immediately recognized that thing that you spend your 20s seeking, which is voice, that sense of having this communion with language that is coming from very deep within, that when you write the words, it's the imprinting of you in that language, and that you have something to say within that language about this, the all, as Whitman calls it. It was there. I had it, and I couldn't. It surprised me, and it was. I had tone, I had control, I had all the things that when you start writing, normally you're just like a swerving car. You're all over the place, and it takes you a long time to get to edit and to get control. But I had it. It was all there, and that's because of the years in newspapers, and that was the journey.
Yeah, and that's I wanted to follow up on this because you are talking. I can't figure out if you're the kind of writer who writes every day or if you have to wait for the muse, because the newspaper writing, I think deadlines are one of the best inspirations to write.
Fabulous, aren't they?
Yeah. And so this sounds like an interesting mix of hitting your deadlines and also sort of waiting for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, the truth is, writing, as Dorothy Parker once said, writing is the art of ass on seat. You don't sit around and wait for the muse to strike. You go to work and you create receptivity for the muse to come, and the best way to do that is to actually just go to work every day. So when I'm not an active writer now, because now I'm the CEO of Paul Lynch, which is what happens when you win the Booker Prize. You become completely estranged from essentially the best part of yourself for a long time, it seems. But where was I again?
You were talking about waiting for the moment and writing.
Yeah, like you don't sit around and go, oh, maybe it'll come today. You go to work, you sit down, and you go into a flow state. That's essentially what writing is. It's a flow state. When they talk about that in sports psychology or whatever it is, fighter pilots talk about flow states. It's actually, the writers are the same. You go into a flow state of reverie, and you come out 90 minutes later, and you've produced something. And sometimes you're really taken aback by it. And so very often for me, the writing of a novel is something I don't remember. Like Prophet Song took me the guts of 4 years. I have almost no memory writing it. Because you disappear into the language. You in many respects, the way I write, it's a kind of I consider it a channeling. Somebody said that to me recently. Someone was saying, you're a channeler. You write like you're channeling something. And they were sort of suggesting that you're channeling something from out there. And I don't quite accept that. I think you're channeling something from within. You're channeling from your own subconscious. Because, oh, okay.
People are menacingly
you.
with microphones.
If you two would both turn off your lavaliers,
Okay.
and then we're going to swap your mics and see if that helps the echo.
I thought somebody was waiting to come and throw me out there.
Yeah.
They were coming after me for asking where you get your ideas from.
Yeah.
Is this better?
You want me to just, yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't remember where I was now. We'll just move on.
Well, you were getting to a place that I wanted to talk about. You've been very open in interviews that I've read about the fact that before you started writing Prophet Song, you worked for 6 months on a book that you said didn't go anywhere, and you finally put it to rest, and the next day you started Prophet Song. And I was curious now, looking back on it with a little bit of distance, was that previous book necessary? Did Prophet Song cannibalize anything from that book, or what's their relationship?
Everything is necessary because you're always growing. You're always trying something out, and you have to write something to know it's not for you. And you see, what I think most writers are looking for, especially if you're a fiction writer, or what I'm looking for, is this a vessel it's like a vessel that you launch to sea, that it sails smoothly, but it's able to contain all your ideas, all the things that you're hunting down, the things that are sort of nucleating around in your subconscious, that this story will suddenly have the ability to take all of this underneath it in the hull of the ship, but it will work as a story. And so I'm looking for a story. I think storytelling is so vastly important, um, that when you think about how our brains work, neuroscientists have shown us that, like, we're surrounded by just billions of input all the time, and our brain is constantly seeing A, and it sees C, and it infers B. We're narrating reality all the time. We're narrating our own lives. We're narrating the story of our lives. Human beings are just innate storytellers. Is what we do. And so story itself, it's like cheesecake for the brain. And and so to me, the goal, um no matter how deep or serious the idea is you're chasing, to me, the real goal is to tell a story that's able to 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 do that thing that stories do. I think it's the hardest thing in the world to do, is actually craft a beautiful story. And because the story, the closer the closer you get to myth, the more freight it carries, the more universal weight is built into it. And so you know it's the hardest thing to do. And so that's what I try to do. Um, where was I going? This is the jet lag, by the way. I warned you. I said,
We were talking about the book you were working on previously.
yeah. And so I was writing the wrong book, and it was not moving like a story. It was not moving like a vessel. And I just thought, I'm done with this. And I put it away. And I had this feeling there was something else there, something, but I couldn't see it. I had no knowledge of what it was. I said, okay, I'm going to come back on Monday morning. It was a Friday afternoon when I stopped writing the bad novel. I came back on Monday morning. I set up the page because I like it to look like a book. I like it to look like it's a finished text. I have a certain font that I like to use, and margins and all of that stuff. And then I was just watching the page, and then I just wrote the opening of Prophet Song. It just came out without any forethought, any preconceptualization of what I was doing. I just wrote the opening page, and it's so close to what is there now. And I knew immediately this was it. It was because it was there in the language, that ineffable substance that you look for, that deep voice, that kind of poetry, that sense of something that's just coming out of nowhere. I just knew that was, so this is the thing, as an artist and also as a meditator, to me, I live in awe of these kind of moments, because you never know what's going to come through. I call it the door into the dark. What you, as an artist, you live with receptivity. You keep that door open. You do not know what's going to come through. You can never see into your own subconscious. But the subconscious, when you use that word, it's kind of the wrong word, because maybe super conscious is more interesting, because we live all day long with a very narrow band of consciousness, selective consciousness, where we're just constantly thinking what I need to do next, what I want, what I desire, what has to be done. And the ego there is at the wheel, just in charge and beeping the horn, and it's a disaster, because there's so much more to consciousness than that, and you can't see it operating. And artists are really gifted at accessing back there. Master meditators are able to actually move aside the ego and use back there to drive that selective consciousness. And so that's, for me, is the magic of it all, and you don't know what's going to come through.
And I'm excited to dive into the book, but I feel like first we have to define a couple of terms, because right before we came on stage, you sort of maybe prickled or reacted interestingly to the D word, dystopian.
Dystopian.
Yes, dystopian.
God.
So, how do you feel about that word? What kind of words do you use to describe the story of Prophet Song?
You see, I don't do the elevator pitch. You know, this sort of summing up your book in two sentences. I just write literature. You know, I write stories. And but publishers love to put you in boxes, and librarians too. I mean, uh, especially American publishers, they have to select these very particular subcategories of literary fiction. And I remember when my first novel was coming out, I was seeing what the categories, and I was sent a very irate email to my editor going, "I'm sorry, I'm none of these categories." And she's like, "But we have to do this for the libraries." And I was like, "But take them off." And like, "But we're lost without them," she was saying. And you know, the problem with the dystopian is this: it's a more serious thing. You know, anything that's speculative ceases to be speculative if in your story, what's in your story is happening somewhere in the world right now. It cannot be dystopian. People start the book, of course, and they start reading it and they think, "Ooh, this is some cautionary tale set in the future." And then at some point, they realize that the book is a Trojan horse and that they're actually in the present tense of the now. And of course, you can read it as a cautionary tale if you want to, though if you were to read it that way, it doesn't seem very far off, frankly, at this point, certainly in certain countries. But the book is articulating a lived reality in the world, and this is part of what I was interested in when I was writing the book is because I was kind of going after something that I think is unique for fiction, about what fiction can truly do, because we live in the age of the spectacle. We've all of us have grown up in a time where you're eating your dinner and at the same time you're watching images of astonishing destruction and dispossession and carnage and collapse on the TV. I mean, this is my childhood. I remember like just watching this stuff, and you're eating your dinner, and at some point you just shut down. You watch it, but it does not penetrate you. And I think there's good reason for that. I don't think we're wired to be able to take on the full scale of the world. We're local creatures, and I don't think we'd be able to consciously take on the level of suffering that. But at the same time, there are humanitarian questions. Just as a citizen, I think we have to think about when we disengage. And Nietzsche once said that pity requires great imagination, and it's true, because to truly understand the complexity of a life, to truly understand all the decisions that a person has to make, say, for example, in Europe, to take a boat, to take one of those boats across the Mediterranean. Very often we lack the capacity to truly think our way into that. And we're so short on bandwidth anyway, but fiction can get you around all those self-defenses that you put up, all those things that you're inured against. Fiction gets you into the space. And in this book, I wrote it in such a way that it would get you right down to the heartbeat of the moment, right into the unfolding, into the complexity of it, so that sympathy would give way for empathy, because you're living it as though it's you. You feel it as though it's you. And at that point, empathy changes your response to the book, and changes your response to the world. And this is what fiction is to me, what good fiction has always done is it promotes empathy. And I think that above all the other art forms, it can do that. It can do that in an extraordinary way.
And I think it's certainly true that what you transpose onto Ireland is there's nothing that's not going on in the world somewhere today. I think you basically said that. But the way that you find, the way that you bring us into it, the book revolves around a mother of four, and it became very apparent to me as a reader that she's the perfect character to come into this story. She's very far removed from the totalitarian government that's taken over, but it's touching her life in very different, increasingly menacing ways. But she became one of my favorite characters, I think, in fiction that I've read in a good long while. I read the book again to sort of to get a sense of how you got her perspective onto things and why she was the right perspective to put into the world. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and whether she was always the way in for you for this particular story.
Yeah, I mean, when I wrote that opening page at that time, she was already built into the language. There was no conscious decision to create Eilish Stack. She just was. She is. And so at that point, I just had to listen to her. And to me, she's really fascinating because she offered me a level of complexity that I've never written about before, in the sense that she's someone that we all of us recognize, in that the squeeze that you get in midlife in your 40s or maybe in your 30s too, and beyond, where suddenly you're at the center of absolutely everything and you're holding the whole thing up, and she's an executive at a pharmaceutical company, so she's got a serious career, but she's got 3 teenage kids. She's got an infant child that's arrived unexpectedly. She's married to Larry, the Deputy General Secretary of the Teachers Union of Ireland, which is a very, very powerful union back home. And she's got Simon, her father, who's sliding into dementia. She's holding a lot. And I'm interested in that complexity because we all live our lives at the center of this complexity, not at the center of political action. And so what unfolds in the book unfolds in the background because she's caught up in her life in the way that we all are. And it's very hard to watch fully and absorb and understand what's going on and to keep track of what's going on when you're completely enmeshed in the intricacies of your own life. And so this was the thing. And I needed Eilish to be this kind of torchbearer in a very dark world. And so, she's constantly trying to, because Larry has disappeared at one point early on in the book. I did think I would write with other characters. And as soon as Larry was gone, suddenly that absence was very powerful to me. And I realized I needed to go back to Eilish and let her carry it through. And suddenly she's in this world of darkness. And to me, she represents something that I'm really interested in as a writer, which is a sort of our own philosophical blindness. We do not know the world. We cannot know the world. And we just move through the dark with a small flame. That's all that we have. And she's moving through this world, trying to make decisions to save her kids and trying to get her husband back. But to navigate this world is beyond her. And so there's a huge element of the Greeks at work there. You can't see the silent clockwork of the fates. And she cannot, the astonishing sort of scale of the collapse, of the mechanism and the collapse. It's very hard to read it. And so this brings in questions of free will, because how much agency do any of us actually have at any point in time? How much agency do you have in a collapsing society? And yet she persists and she lives in hope. And at one point she says, because somebody says to her, even the dogs in the street know what's happened, our husbands. And she has this an attitude of, well, where there is she's fundamentally aligned towards hope. Where there is doubt, there cannot be despair, and where there is doubt, there is hope. And that's her attitude, and that's what takes her along into the circles of hell, so to speak.
Okay. Now, I have worked as a book critic. You said you worked as a film critic, and
I did also review some books.
yeah, okay. I did read one review that that I thought I did not agree with. That felt you weren't specific enough about the National Alliance Party, right? The totalitarian force. That the choice didn't make their supporters sympathetic enough for you, which.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking as an American, who's been deeply frustrated by a media that's desperate to like both sides fascism and candidates, it just seems wrong to me. Like it seems to completely miss the point.
Need to reread the book. That's all.
Yeah.
Just read it again, and then it'll become apparent.
Yeah. I mean, it's not as though
Afterwards, let me know who that was, and I'll have my publicist send them a copy again with a little note. That Faulkner once said, somebody said, I just didn't get your book. And he said, read it again, and then read it again. And then after that, read it again.
Yeah. Yeah. That's you never sort of toned up or toned down the presence of the party, did you? It doesn't seem like you were ever interested in.
Not interested in it, because as soon as you write about the party, as soon as you identify the politics, the book's about the politics, and is finished.
Right.
It's one of those books. We all know what those books are. It's done. It's not Prophet Song. The reason I'm sitting here talking to you is because of the choices that I made in this book.
Mhm.
And as an author, every single choice is a rational decision when you're dealing with, when you're like Ingmar Bergman said, intuition is the spear you throw into the dark, but intellect is the army you send in afterwards. Everything is thought through. And so for this book, if I had written about the regime, then the book would just be about the regime. And the mythic quality of this book would have been lost. The unique qualities of what makes this book. It is a study in, it's an existential study. It is a study in, it's a metaphysical novel, not a political novel.
Mhm.
I've said this from the start. On the night I won the Booker Prize, I was sitting holding a press conference, and they were calling it a political novel. And I said it's not a political novel, because for me, the political is too narrow a lens, and we've come through a time when a vast amount of fiction has been aggressively political. And as a citizen, I'm all for progress. Like but to me, I see something being lost in fiction, because that once you start advocating aggressively for something, you're messaging, and when you're messaging, it's no longer art. Something really important is being lost. When you sit down to write something and you know the answer, then it's grievance. Grief is what great art should be about. Grief is what we cannot understand. What is the human condition? What is the full nature of loss? It's what lies beyond our ken. Just the fundamental problems of knowledge. This is where grief lies. And Keats once talked about negative capability, and he said that the greatest writers wrote into the unknown without searching for answers, without searching for certainty. And he said that Shakespeare had the greatest amount of negative capability. And this for me is the most important thing, is the framing of the questions is more important than the answers. And so if you come at fiction politically, there are very, very few writers who can turn it into art. And Stendhal has this line in The Red and the Black that always made me laugh. He said, politics is the millstone around the neck of literature and drowns it in less than 15 minutes. And that's how I felt writing this book. I thought there is a political lens, but fundamentally this is a metaphysical novel. It's asking big questions, but it's framing them mythically. It's it reverts back to like, for those of you who've read the book, or for those of you who haven't, there's a moment later in the novel when Ailish has gone through the unraveling And she's in the ninth circle of hell, and she's looking out at the world, and she realizes that, this idea of biblical of cataclysm that you grow up hearing about, that it's a myth. It's only a myth. It's just a story. And that the end of the world is always occurring. It's happening again and again and again and again. And it's always local. It comes to your city, it comes to your town, it knocks on your door. It's the end of the world for your your family, your community, your people. Meanwhile, everybody else watches it on the news. And so this book is a wail of grief about what we continue to do to ourselves, what we will always do to ourselves, and what has always been in the past. And that's what this book is about. And that's not political.
I agree. Did you want to read a little bit from the book?
Sure. Yeah. Bit tricky with the mic, but we'll do it. Gosh, it's very noisy in here, isn't it? Are you ready? The night has come, and she has not heard the knocking, standing at the window looking out onto the garden. How the dark gathers without sound the cherry trees. It gathers the last of the leaves, and the leaves do not resist the dark, but accept the dark and whisper, tired now, the day almost behind her, all that still has to be done before bed, and the children settled in the living room, this feeling of rest for a moment by the glass, watching the darkening garden and the wish to be at one with this darkness, to step outside and lie down with it, to lie with the fallen leaves and let the night pass over, to wake then with the dawn and rise renewed with the morning come. But the knocking. She hears it pass into thought, the sharp, insistent rapping, each knock possessed so fully of the knocker, she begins to frown. Then Bailey, too, is knocking on the glass door to the kitchen. He calls out to her, "Ma'am," pointing to the hallway without lifting his eyes from the screen. Eilish finds her body moving towards the hall with the baby in her arms. She opens the front door, and two men are standing before the porch glass, almost faceless in the dark. She turns on the porch light, and the men are known in an instant from how they are stood. The night cold air suspiring, it seems, as she slides open the patio door. The suburban quiet. The rain falling almost unspoken onto St. Lawrence Street, upon the black car parked in front of the house. How the men seem to carry the feeling of the night. She watches them from within her own protective feeling. The young man on the left is asking if her husband is home, and there is something in the way he looks at her, the remote yet scrutinizing eyes that make it seem as though he is trying to seize hold of something within her. In a blink, she has sought up and down the street, seeing a lone walker with a dog under an umbrella, the willows nodding to the rain, the strobings of a large TV screen in the Zajic's house across the street. She checks herself then, almost laughing, this universal reflex of guilt when the police call to your door. Ben begins to squirm in her arms, and the older plainclothes man to her right is watching the child. His face seems to soften, and so she addresses herself to him. She knows he too is a father. Such things are always known, that other fellow is much too young, too neat and hard boned. She begins to speak, aware of a sudden falter in her voice. He will be home soon, in an hour or so. Would you like me to give him a ring? No, that will not be necessary, Mrs. Stack. When he comes home, could you tell him to call us at his earliest convenience? This is my card. Please call me Eilish. Is it something I can help you with? No, I'm afraid not, Mrs. Stack. This is a matter for your husband. The older plainclothes man is smiling fully at the child, and she watches for a moment the wrinkles about the mouth. It is a face put out by solemnity. the wrong face for the job. It is nothing to worry about, Mrs. Stack. Why should I be worried, Garda? Yes, indeed, Mrs. Stack. We don't want to be taking up any more of your time, and aren't we damp enough this evening making calls? It'll be hard work getting ourselves dry with the heater in the car. She slides the patio door closed, holding the card in her hand, watching the two men return to the car, watching the car move up the street. It brakes for the junction and its tail lights intensify, taking the look of two eyes that gleam. She looks once more onto the street, returned to an evening's quiet, the heat from the hall as she steps inside and shuts the front door. And then she stands a moment examining the card and finds she has been holding her breath. This feeling now that something has come into the house. She wants to put the baby down. She wants to stand and think, seeing how it stood with the two men and came into the hallway of its own accord. Something formless yet felt. She can sense it skulking alongside her as she steps through the living room past the children. Molly is holding the remote control over Bailey's head, his hands flapping in the air. He turns towards her with a pleading look. Ma'am, tell her to put my show back on. Ailish closes the kitchen door and places the child in the rocker, begins to clear from the table her laptop and diary, but stops and closes her eyes. This feeling that came into the house has followed. She looks to her phone and picks it up, her hand hesitating. She sends Larry a message, finds herself again by the window watching outside. The darkening garden not to be wished upon now, for something of that darkness has come into the house.
Thank you. Um, I mean, I could talk about the language forever in that. I did want to ask you the choice in the book to have very few paragraphs and to have it's just sort of a cascading wall of text on every page. When I think it could just as easily, you say you're not a poet, I think it could just as easily be broken up into poetry. And I just wanted to ask you about that decision, if you're willing to share.
Yeah, of course. I mean, when you're writing a novel and when you're writing anything, you have to think about the form. And the form is that mesh, that invisible mesh that holds it all together. It's all the decisions you make. You know, how long or short are your sentences? What kind of language are you using? Um, all these little decisions go into it. And the truth is that when you take form seriously, every decision you make should associate back to the meaning in the text. And so, you know, sometimes I see writers and they're fiddling and they do things for the sake of doing it, and there's no deeper meaning to it because you really study it, and that's just it's kind of pretentious because they're just trying to make it look interesting by taking something out or doing, and it's not adding to the meaning. It's just making it a bit edgier, but it's not really making it edgy. But every decision you make is important. And when I started writing this book, I did put some paragraph marks in, and the book just said no, sorry, take them back out. And I said, "Are you sure?" And the book said, "Yes, keep going." And so I kept going. And what I realized writing this book is, you know, there needed to be no paragraphs because I wanted the reader to feel the sense of claustrophobia, the sense of that there's no room to breathe, there's nowhere to turn. That's how it's part of the technique of how I get you right up there with Ailish, how you get the feeling of Ailish from this book. But also, like, there are decisions such as the long sentence. There are some very long sentences in this book, and the long sentence can do things that are interesting. Like, they can create the feeling of inevitability, that feeling of being caught in a riptide, where events are just moving and pulling you along. But also, the long sentence can transport the reader completely into the now of the text. Virginia Woolf talked about moments of being. We all occasionally have them where you suddenly egoically just fall away and you're just at one with time. You're one with the moment. You're entered into the flux. And when you write with a long sentence, you can create that. At least that's the goal for me. And like the way I write, I write in the present tense, and the sentences are mimetic. And what I mean by that is that they're different from, say, that sort of objective realism of Flaubert written in the past tense. That's the dominant way of writing fiction, and it's still the dominant way. I write in the present tense because I want language to actually meet the moment in its unfolding. I want language to press into the hidden and the unknown, the intuitive and the felt, as much as the real, as much as the objective. And it can press into emotion. And so the language can morph into the unfolding. And so it creates that sense of empathy we were talking about, but it also creates that sense of total immersion. Because I think that fiction is fundamentally inquiry. It's about the questions that you're asking. It's fiction is a philosophical attitude to the world. And so for me, my sentences in the present tense will create that feeling of alienation that we all have. Will create that feeling of unknowing, where you're right up against the moment and you do not know what's going to come next. And Ailish, she's going through the labyrinth where she cannot see around the corners. And so that feeling of being in these long sentences in the present tense gives you that feeling of alienation and not knowing. And that's how we live our own lives too.
Absolutely. I don't even know if this is a question, but I just have to say that the name Detective Inspector John Stamp is right up there in terms of excellent character names. It's kind of Dickensian, stamping. You have stamping something out. You have the tiny pieces of sticky paper that the government imbues with value. It's just like such a magnificent name for a character that I just had to congratulate you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's what's interesting about him, and you get the chat at the door, which is, if any of you ever been to Ireland, our police, the Gardaí, are very, they're not armed. That we do have the armed defense units, but generally speaking, our police are unarmed and very friendly and chatty, and that kind of local culture is what's permeated through the force. They started out as community police. And so there's that chat that he's having, but at the same time, he's petrifying because he represents the state and he represents a new arm of the state, which is, this is a populist government that's come into power, and they have enacted before the book, they've enacted an Emergency Powers Act, where they have, through that, silenced the judiciary, and that's classic playbook for when you really want to start taking control. And he's part of the Garda National Services Bureau, which is the secret police. We don't have secret police, but yet he's a guard. He just has the form. And at one point, she sees him in the supermarket, and he's dressed in his civvies with his wife doing the shopping, and it's this cognitive dissonance of he just seems like just he's a man in his community. He's a man out doing the shopping with his wife. But he's not that at the same time. He's just so much more. And he's that complicated face of terror.
So we are going to turn to questions to you. I have one more question, then we're going to turn it over to you. Seattle is a UNESCO city of literature. I think we have a lot of readers here who like to read widely. I was wondering if there was anything about contemporary Irish literature that you'd like us to know, any authors or books that you've read that you think that we should know about that we might not.
Gosh, I mean, Irish writing seems to be having a moment, doesn't it? Everyone's talking about Irish writing, and it's been interesting because I think it represents something very unique to us right now. So much of when countries have movements, very often those movements are as a result of great social change. And Ireland is going through an enormous social change right now. We're kind of experiencing what a lot of more, advanced Western countries went through in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. Like Ireland was in the grip of the Catholic Church for a very long time. It was effectively a theocracy, and it was easing up in the 90s when I was coming of age, but it was still very dominant. And the thing about the church, what it did to the country was that, Freud once joked that the Irish are the only nation impervious to psychoanalysis. And I often wondered what he meant by that. And then it occurred to me that, what I think what he really meant was that, if you go to psychoanalysis, what they're really doing very often is locating the shame within you, and they're taking it out. But in Ireland, the shame was structural. It was literally the structure of society was how shame was operated, and so you couldn't take it out of the person because they were in the soup all day long, and that's all gone. The church has no power anymore. Ireland is a completely modern European country now, and it's a really wonderful place to live. But all of that and all those energies of change are having an enormous effect on artists, because we're starting to rethink, re-identify what is it to be an Irish person now. This is a country that was the first country in the world by popular vote to vote in gay marriage. We recently, 3 years later, then voted for abortion. And we'd had a long history of not voting for abortion prior to that. So there's been a complete volte-face. And so the artists and writers are really tuning into that sense of who are we now, this globalized country. And so there are many writers. I'll mention because I don't think he had a moment over here. Mike McCormack, Solar Bones is a really wonderful novel. And it's written as one sentence, though you can actually read it quite easily. Where the breaks are. You just, he makes it easy, but it really just gets into a certain sense of Ireland and what it used to be and what it's becoming. And it's an important book. And I mentioned that one because I don't think that got a huge amount of attention back home, but I'm not sure that it got much over here.
Perfect. Thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I thought you might have an answer, though. Do we have any questions for the author?
We're going to bring a little mic to you, and I just would like to take a moment to encourage us to all agree together not to spoil the ending of the book. Does that sound good? Everybody agree?
A lot of people here haven't read the book, so we don't want to talk about the ending.
Or maybe they're in the middle of it. So can we get an enthusiastic consent to that? Okay, fantastic. We have a question here.
Looks like a vape. What does it take to be
I don't
an
think anyone can hear you.
Irish writer?
What does it take to be an Irish writer?
Yes. Do you have to kiss the Blarney Stone or spend most of your adult life after 12 in pubs, or how does it work? Or
The
what
pubs have nothing to do with it. I can guarantee you that. If you spend your time in the pubs, then you just burn out into nothing. The thing is, there's something that Irish writing has that's really unique, which is when obviously we were colonized by the British, by the English, but we colonized their language. And we did so because many of the ways we speak we speak English, are built upon constructions from the Irish language. And so you get this sort of sense of freedom grammatically that you can just the sentences can move around. I'll give you a strange example of this. I once overheard on walking to the shops, very, very Dublin characters stopping on the street, a woman stopping a guy, and she said to him, "Were you lashing the sunbeds out of it?" Now, I realize none of you understand what that means, but were you lashing the sunbeds out of it? Were you using the sunbeds too much? That's what she's asking him. But the construction of it is an amazing grammar, and it's coming from the Irish language. And so there's this sort of inbuilt lyricism in the way we express ourselves, and there's that freedom with the language, and that freedom is enormous. And when you grow up in a country where you've had Yeats, Joyce, and Beckett, you're like, the energy that they transmit into the culture is enormous. It's thermonuclear. It's just, you don't have to read Joyce to know Joyce. He's in the water. When you drink the water, you're drinking Joyce. We even have Yates water now. Some smart arse somewhere is actually bottling water and they're calling it Yates water. And you don't actually have to, you don't have to have read Yates to know Yates. It's just it's there. And so I think that's a great amount of freedom that you have. But I think that also it's really important that, like, Ireland wasn't always there was reputation for writers, but it wasn't as, sometimes there's a sense that there's a factory in the Midlands and we're just making more and more writers every year. And maybe if you lift up the back of my head, you'll see a stamp with a code on it, manufacturing number. But there's something to be said about the way Irish writers are supported by the state. The state is, the state funds our libraries entirely. The state funds artists. We have an amazing arts council, and the last 5 years, the government has funded all the writers who needed to get funded got funding, and that's very important because, stressing out about money is the greatest poison for a writer. And when you have to go to work, which is that's the reality, and then you're coming home and you're trying to write late at night, you cannot get your best writing. And so when you're able to be a full-time writer, we also have we're tax-free as well up to a certain threshold, which means that you can live on your income. You don't actually have to earn a giant amount to live. And so that's really important. It means writers get to shape their brain around the work without worrying about, not having to hold down a day job. And I was talking to Jane Urquhart about this. She's a friend of mine, and I said to her, you said your generation of Canadian writers is astonishing. There's just so many titans. And she said, well, the Canadian government did something similar to us, and I think it was in the 80s that they paid us to write, and we weren't allowed to have jobs. And you got Monroe and Ondaatje and Atwood and so on and so forth. There's extraordinary caliber there, and so that ability to go at it with all your energy makes a big difference. Thank you.
Question here in the middle.
So my question is this, right? Your book resonates with so many people around the world because the things are happening, what you have explained here. So is it that in the back of your mind, there was something that touched you in your early years, or you read the history, or you see, because you talked about eating your lunch and seeing the thing on the TV, which doesn't match, right? Your senses are numbed by it, that you're no more egg. It doesn't make any difference to you. You still keep on it. Did something hit you in your early years, or did you read something and then this idea came? Or how was it?
Well, when I was trying to write way back before, when I was talking about that sentence that I was trying to write, I had a sense of change on in the sense of that we're moving, all of us, in a direction that's very different to where we have been for decades, in the sort of the way that we've all come of age in liberal democracies, and we just assume that the liberal democracies is what we shall always have, and that we always hold to the center. And I could sense 6-7 years ago that was really going to change. But then I remember very distinctly rereading Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse, and this was the moment when I understood. And so Steppenwolf is a book that I'd read in my 20s, and there was one page in that book where Harry Haller is looking out at Germany in 1927, and he sees the fragmentation of the politics and the anti-Semitism and the xenophobia and how open it all is. And he said the next war is inevitable. When I read that in my 20s, I thought, this is extraordinary. like to live in such a time, what must that have been like? Because in the 90s, you know, it was just so far away from that. You know, the center held. Fukuyama had said that history had come to an end. Or maybe he didn't quite say that, but that's, you know, print the legend, as so the legend got printed. But when I reread that book in 2018, I read that page and I got a chill because I thought, oh my gosh, we're here now. And I could just see how it was unraveling. I could just see the whole thing. But I wasn't thinking about that when I was writing the book. It was just coming through. And the pace of change has been almost exponential since. And, you know, it's my feeling that we're living in a different time now. Thank you.
I think we maybe have time for one more.
We have time for one more if people are, maybe we're feeling like we want to
Great.
get our books signed.
Yeah.
that how we're
You are
feeling?
welcome to bring your questions over to the table.
Oh, you're not welcome to bring questions. Just bring yourself.
Just bring praise,
No
lavish
questions.
praise
God.
upon him.
You've no idea how tired I am.
Well, yeah, the good people of Elliott Bay Book Company are waiting to sell you a book. And yeah, thank you all so much for coming out. And thank you so much, Paul Lynch, for coming out and
you
sharing
for the
this with
interview.
us.